I remember the exact moment the night snapped in half. It was the way my father looked at me across the dinner table, like he was tired of even pretending I mattered. He pointed his fork at me and said the sentence I had heard my entire life, but somehow it cut deeper that night. Your brother is successful and responsible, unlike you. The words hung in the air, cold and sharp, like they'd been waiting all day to wound me. My mother didn't even look up from her plate. She just nodded, as if my failures were a fact as obvious as the weather. I opened my mouth to speak, to defend myself for once, but my voice got stuck somewhere between my chest and my pride. The room felt too small, too quiet, too rehearsed. It always felt that way when they talked about Daniel. He was their pride, their story, their favorite photograph on the mantel. I was the background, the shadow, the disappointment they never bothered to fix. Before I could force out a single word, there was a knock at the door. Sharp, official, heavy. The kind of knock you feel in your bones before you even hear it. My father frowned, annoyed that someone dared interrupt his lecture. He stood up, muttering under his breath, and pulled the door open. 2 police officers stood there. Their uniforms looked darker than the night behind them. They asked if Daniel was home. My father's face changed instantly, confusion twisting into worry. He stepped aside and called for my brother. My mother was already out of her chair, asking if something had happened, her voice too high, too afraid, too protective. Daniel walked into the hallway with the same calm smile he used on everyone, the smile that always got him out of trouble, the smile that made teachers, neighbors, and even strangers adore him. But the officers didn't smile back. They asked him to come with them to answer questions about a missing woman named Lily Morrow. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the air felt frozen. My mother whispered that there had to be a mistake. My father demanded to know what evidence they had. Daniel insisted he didn't know anyone by that name, but his voice wasn't steady, not like usual. It wavered, just a little, like a loose thread in a perfect shirt. I watched him, really watched him, maybe for the first time ever. And something flickered in his eyes that I couldn't name, something quick and dark that didn't belong to the brother I thought I knew. My parents didn't notice. They were too busy defending him, protecting him, rewriting reality around him like they always did. When the officers escorted Daniel to the car, my mother grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. "Don't just stand there," she hissed. "Say something. Do something." But what was I supposed to say? That I believed him? That I didn't? Because the truth was, I didn't know what I believed anymore. As the police car pulled away, I felt a strange chill run through me. It wasn't fear. It wasn't relief. It was something else, something I couldn't explain then, but I understand it now. It was the first warning that my family, and the brother I thought I knew, were about to unravel in ways I never imagined. I always thought Daniel would walk out of the station with that same practiced smile he wore everywhere, the one that made people forgive him before he even asked. But when the door finally opened and he stepped into the waiting area, he didn't look like the golden child anymore. His shoulders were tight, his jaw locked, and there was a thin shine of sweat on his forehead that he tried wiping away before anyone noticed. Almost no one did. But I did. My parents rushed to him instantly, hovering like frightened birds. My mother asked a dozen questions at once. My father demanded to know why the detective had treated their son like a criminal. Daniel barely answered either of them. His eyes weren't on our parents. They were on me, watching me, measuring what I might have heard or understood. On the ride home, the silence felt loud. My parents whispered excuses under their breath, building a little wall of denial around themselves. They said the police must have confused him with someone else. They said Daniel would never be involved with a missing woman. They said everything except the one thing they were both afraid to consider. My brother didn't speak. He just stared out the window with a face that looked carved instead of alive. Later, when my parents retreated to the kitchen, Daniel cornered me in the hallway. His voice was low, almost calm, but it had an edge I'd never heard before. He asked if I had said anything to the police. I told him I didn't even know what was happening. He stepped closer, too close, his jaw twitching the way it always did when he was about to lose control. "Just stay quiet," he said. "About everything." I asked him what everything meant. His expression tightened, and for a second, the mask slipped. Fear flickered in his eyes. Not guilt, not anger, but actual fear. It made my stomach twist. Then he walked away without answering me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the detective repeat Lily's name, watching how Daniel's face had flinched every single time. I replayed the moment over and over until I felt sick. Around midnight, I heard something outside, metal scraping against dirt. A slow, heavy rhythm. I pushed my curtain aside and saw Daniel in the backyard, half hidden by the shadows. He was digging, hard, fast, like he needed to get something buried before morning. The sound of the shovel hitting the ground carried through the still air, sharp and cold. I stood there, watching him, unable to move. Every instinct in me whispered that whatever he was burying, it wasn't something harmless. And deep down, I knew this was only the first crack. More were coming, more than I was ready for. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the dull thud of Daniel's shovel hitting the dirt. It echoed in my head like a warning I couldn't escape. By the time the sky softened into gray, curiosity had burned a hole straight through my fear. I slipped outside while the house was still quiet and walked toward the disturbed patch of earth behind the old oak tree. The soil was loose, still raw from Daniel's hands. I hesitated for only a moment before digging. My fingers stung as they scraped through the dirt, and then they hit something hard. A small plastic bag, hastily tied. My stomach tightened as I pulled it out and opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a shattered phone, its screen cracked like a spiderweb, a bracelet with dried blood on the clasp, and a flash drive, small and black, with dirt still clinging to its edges. I stared at the items. My breath caught somewhere deep in my chest. The bracelet looked familiar. I didn't want to believe it, but I already knew. The news had shown a picture of one just like it, Lily Morrow's bracelet, the missing girl everyone was suddenly talking about. My fingers felt numb as I rushed back to my room and plugged the flash drive into my laptop. For a second, nothing happened. Then a single folder appeared. Audio files. The first one clicked on by itself, almost like it wanted to be heard. Lily's voice filled my room. Small, frightened, pleading. She begged someone to let her go. She promised she wouldn't tell anyone. She kept saying she just wanted to go home. Then another voice joined hers, calm, steady. A voice I'd heard every day of my life. Daniel. He told her to stop crying. He told her to be useful. He spoke like she was an inconvenience he needed to manage, not a human being begging for her life. I felt the world tilt under me, like the floor had turned to water. I stopped the recording halfway through, unable to hear more. It took everything in me not to scream. At breakfast, I tried to act normal, but the dirt under my nails gave me away. My mother's eyes narrowed first, then my father's jaw tightened. They kept glancing at each other, at me, at my hands, as if they were putting together a puzzle they didn't want finished. Daniel walked in last. His gaze went straight to me, cold, sharp, like he was studying every breath I took. His lips barely moved, but the message was clear. He knew. I looked down at my shaking hands, at the dirt I hadn't managed to wash out completely, and a chill ran through me so deep it felt like it came from my bones. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just holding his secrets. I had become one. I knew something was wrong the moment I walked through the front door that evening. The house was too still, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. My parents sat on the living room couch, not watching TV, not talking, just waiting. The way people wait for someone who owes them an explanation. My mother spoke first. She didn't ask how my day was. She didn't ask what was wrong. She went straight for the kill. "Where is it, Alice?" Her voice was low, tight, almost trembling with anger she didn't bother to hide. I played dumb, but she stood up so fast her glass of water shook on the table. "Don't insult us," she said. "Give us the bracelet, and whatever else you took." My father's eyes stayed locked on me, cold and unblinking. It wasn't worry. It wasn't fear. It was something closer to disgust, like he was looking at the one piece of the puzzle that had finally stepped out of line. I told them I didn't know what they were talking about, but they already knew. Somehow, they always knew. My father took a step closer. "This isn't a game," he said. "You hand it over, or you won't like where this goes." Something in me cracked at those words. A tiny piece of the child I used to be, the one who always wondered why I was treated differently, finally understood they weren't scared for Daniel. They weren't shocked. They were angry because I had touched something they had been hiding for years. My mother leaned in, her face inches from mine. "Families protect each other," she whispered. But there was no warmth in her voice. It felt like a threat wrapped in a rule I was suddenly expected to obey. And it hit me then. Hard. They knew. They had always known who Daniel really was. They weren't blind parents defending their son out of love. They were accomplices. They had covered for him before. Smoothed things over. Paid things off. Fed the perfect child story to everyone while using me as the reminder of what failure looked like. Every birthday, every holiday, every argument replayed in my head with new meaning. They hadn't praised Daniel because he was perfect. They praised him so loudly that no one would ever hear the screams underneath. My father reached out as if to grab my arm, as if he thought intimidation would work the way it used to. But something inside me hardened. I stepped back. And for the first time in my life, I saw them clearly. Not as parents, but as people capable of terrible choices. Their faces twisted with frustration when I didn't break. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, their shadows stretching toward me like they wanted to swallow me whole. In that moment, one truth settled inside me like ice. This wasn't just Daniel's secret, it was theirs, and now that I knew it, they were ready to do whatever it took to silence me. I didn't plan to run. It just happened the moment survival became louder than fear. 1 second my parents were closing in on me, their voices sharp and relentless, and the next I was shoving past them and bolting toward the front door. My father grabbed my wrist, hard enough to bruise, but adrenaline made me stronger than I'd ever been. I yanked free, stumbled across the porch, and ran barefoot into the dark. The cold ground cut my feet, branches slapped against my legs, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The flash drive was clenched in my fist like it was the only thing keeping my heart beating. By the time I reached the edge of town, my lungs were burning and my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the key card to the cheap motel I'd found. The room smelled like old cigarettes and damp carpet, but it was a door I could lock. That was enough. I slid down onto the floor, my back pressed against the bed frame, and tried to breathe. My phone buzzed in my pocket, over and over, until I finally forced myself to look. 17 missed calls from my mother, 10 from my father, 3 from Daniel. Then a voicemail appeared. Her voice was soft, controlled, almost sweet. "Alice, honey, come home. We can fix this. Don't ruin your brother's life." That was it. Not a single word asking if I was safe. Not a single mention of Lily. It was all about Daniel, as always. About protecting the son who had destroyed someone else's life and nearly taken mine without a second thought. I listened to the voicemail twice. By the third time, something inside me went numb. I realized she didn't see me as her daughter. She saw me as a liability, a problem to remove, a threat to the facade they'd spent years building around Daniel. My hands trembled as I opened the flash drive again. I played the recording of Lily's voice, the way she cried, the way she begged, the way her breathing shook every time Daniel spoke. I memorized every sound until it felt carved into my bones. I whispered to her that I was sorry. Sorry she didn't have someone to run for her. Sorry she didn't get the chance to fight. Sorry that no one listened when it mattered. But I was listening now. I wasn't going to be the next girl who disappeared because she knew too much. I wasn't going to let Daniel walk away again, or my parents. If they wanted to protect him, then they could face the consequences with him. Revenge wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a path, and I knew I couldn't walk it empty-handed. Patience and evidence. That's what it would take. And starting tonight, I would gather both. The next morning, I walked into the town library with a hood pulled low and my heartbeat still unsteady. The place smelled like dust and old paper, the kind of quiet space where secrets felt heavier. I went straight to the archives, a cramped room in the back where newspapers yellowed on metal racks, and no one bothered to dust the corners. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. I just knew that if Daniel had hurt Lily, it probably wasn't the first time. It didn't take long. The first clipping was from 3 years ago. A college student who disappeared after leaving a cafe Daniel visited almost every afternoon. The second was from 5 years earlier. A young waitress who was last seen outside a bar where Daniel used to work part-time. Both cases labeled insufficient evidence. Both cases abandoned quietly after a few weeks. I traced the headlines with my fingertips, feeling sick. It was all right there, scattered in plain sight, but no one had wanted to connect the dots. And I understood why. This town loved my family. My father donated to every fundraiser. My mother charmed her way through every social circle. Daniel was the star they liked to brag about, the boy with a promising future. People didn't just look away. They protected the story they preferred to believe. I was about to leave when someone cleared his throat behind me. A tall man in a worn jacket stood in the doorway, studying me with tired eyes. I recognized him from an old article taped to the wall. Detective Halloran. Retired now, rumored to have stepped down after disagreements with the department. His voice was rough when he spoke. "You're the Parker girl, the quiet one." I didn't correct him. He nodded toward the clippings at my feet. "You're digging in dangerous places." Something in his tone made me trust him more than anyone else had in a long time. I showed him the flash drive. He plugged it into a library computer without hesitation. When Lily's voice played, his expression tightened. When Daniel's voice followed, calm and cold, he went completely still. After a long moment, he shut the window and looked at me. I knew something was wrong with him. His voice was barely above a whisper. "But your family, they have long arms in this town. They'll destroy you before they ever let him fall." I met his gaze and felt a strange calm settle over me. "I already know," I said, "but I'm done running." Halloran studied me for a moment, then nodded like he saw something in me he hadn't expected. Maybe strength. Maybe stubbornness. Either way, he didn't tell me to stop. And for the first time, I felt like I wasn't fighting the truth alone. I knew he would find me eventually, but knowing didn't make it easier when I opened my motel room door and saw him standing there. Daniel leaned against the railing like he was visiting an old friend, not hunting down his own sister. He smiled the same warm smile he used on teachers and neighbors, the one that made everyone believe he was harmless. But his eyes were ice. No warmth, no hesitation, just calculation. "Can we talk?" he asked softly. "Like family." The way he said the word family made my stomach twist. I told him no. I tried to shut the door, but he pushed it back with one hand, effortless, like he'd been expecting the resistance. His smile stretched thinner. "Alice, come on. You've gotten yourself worked up over nothing. You always do." His voice dipped into that familiar condescension he used whenever he wanted me small, manageable. "We just need to clear the air." I stepped back, keeping distance between us. He walked slowly into the room without being invited, looking around like he owned the place. "You've been busy," he murmured. "Asking questions, talking to the wrong people." He turned to me. "That's dangerous." I told him I wasn't scared of him anymore. For a second, something flickered in his expression. Surprise. Then the mask cracked. His smile vanished, replaced by something sharper, darker. "You think Lily was the only one who tried to ruin me?" he asked. "You think she was the first?" He shook his head like he felt sorry for me. "People get confused. They panic. They make accusations they shouldn't. But family is supposed to help fix things." My chest tightened. He wasn't warning me. He was admitting it. Not directly, not clearly, but enough for me to feel the truth settle like ice beneath my skin. Lily wasn't his first victim, and my parents had known. I didn't wait for him to step closer. I darted toward the bathroom, slipped through the back window, and dropped onto the gravel behind the motel. My hands scraped open, my knees bruised, but I kept running. I heard Daniel's steps inside the room, then the door swinging open, but I didn't look back. Just before I turned the corner, his voice carried through the night, calm, steady, almost gentle. "You're making me do this, Alice." That line followed me like a shadow, but something inside me shifted as I ran. The fear that had held me hostage for days was gone, burned away by something heavier and sharper. Anger. And anger, once awakened, is a force no hunter should ever underestimate. I met Halloran again 2 towns over, in a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and old leather boots. He slid into the seat across from me with the quiet confidence of someone who'd seen too much and stopped being afraid of it. I told him Daniel had found me. I told him everything Daniel hinted at. Halloran didn't flinch. He just nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting that moment for years. "We'll need a plan," he said. "A careful one. Your parents won't give us much time once they realize you're not backing down." That was the first time someone acknowledged the truth out loud. That my biggest threat wasn't just Daniel, but the people who raised me. We spread documents and notes between our plates, going over every detail like we were stitching a case from broken pieces. Halloran taught me how this town really worked. Who owed favors, who pretended not to know things, who folded under pressure. "Some people won't talk," he warned, "but some will if they realize the cover-up might drag them down too." For the first time, I saw the patterns clearly. My father's donations, my mother's friendships, the smiling handshakes, the quiet warnings, the way every missing girl's case had been smothered with polite silence. They weren't protecting the town. They were protecting Daniel. Each night after our meetings, I went back to the motel and listened to the recordings again. Not because I wanted to, because I needed to. I needed to remember Lily's voice, the way it shook, the fear tangled in every breath she took. I needed the reminder that this wasn't just about exposing a monster. It was about giving someone their justice, even if she wasn't here to see it. Hearing her cry broke something inside me every time, but it also sharpened me. It reminded me why running wasn't an option anymore. A few days later, my parents released a statement online, and through the local paper, it painted me as unstable, delusional, a troubled daughter seeking attention by attacking her own family. Reading it felt like being punched in the chest, even though I should have expected it. They called me a liar so easily, it made me wonder how many times they'd done it before, behind closed doors, to neighbors and friends. But underneath the hurt, I felt something shift. They were scrambling. They were scared. I wasn't under their control anymore, and that terrified them far more than the truth ever could. For the first time in a long time, a spark of hope lit inside me. Not soft or gentle, but sharp, like a blade finally finding its edge. And I knew exactly where to aim it next. The storm rolled in just after sunset, the kind that shakes the sky before it ever touches the ground. Halloran said it was the perfect night. Storms make people honest. Storms make people desperate. And storms make it harder for the wrong ears to listen. We drove to a cabin buried at the edge of the woods, far enough from town that no one would wander in by accident. When we walked inside, 3 officers were already there. Men Halloran trusted, men who didn't owe my parents favors, men who looked tired of pretending they didn't see what was right in front of them. No one spoke at first. The wind battered the windows. The lights flickered. I felt my pulse in my throat. Halloran nodded at me. "Show them." My hands shook, but I took out the flash drive and plugged it into the small laptop he'd brought. Lily's voice filled the cabin. Soft. Terrified. Broken. Then Daniel's voice followed, steady and cold, telling her to stop crying, telling her she needed to cooperate. The room went dead still. One of the officers looked at the floor like he couldn't stand to meet anyone's eyes. Another leaned forward, fists clenched, jaw locked. When the recording ended, the storm outside felt quieter than the silence inside. I placed the bracelet on the table, Lily's bracelet, blood still dried along the clasp. Then the shattered phone pieces, timestamps, locations gaps in Daniel's alibi that lined up perfectly with the nights those girls vanished. It only took minutes for everything to shift. One officer finally spoke, his voice rough. "Years ago, I was told to drop a case involving Daniel Parker. No explanation, just drop it." He rubbed his face like he was trying to wipe away the memory. I should have pushed back. Another officer muttered, "They protected him all this time." The truth spread through the cabin like fire catching on dry brush. They asked questions, read dates, pieced together what the town had buried for years. And for the first time, no one hesitated to say what needed to be said. "He needs to be arrested tonight," Halloran said, "before his parents catch wind of this, before they move him, hide him, or cover for him again." Every officer nodded. Thunder cracked above us, rattling the walls, and something inside me finally loosened, like a weight I'd carried my whole life was sliding off piece by piece. It was finally happening. The reckoning I'd waited for, the one Daniel never thought I'd be brave enough to start. Dawn broke in a pale gray line across the sky when the officers moved in. The world felt strangely calm for a moment, like even the air was holding its breath. Then everything erupted at once, pounding on the door, shouts, the sound of boots on hardwood. I stood behind Halloran on the porch, my hands cold, my heart louder than the storm had been the night before. Daniel opened the door with that same polished smile he always used when he wanted to charm his way out of trouble. "Officers," he said lightly, "there must be some misunderstanding." But they didn't play along this time. They stepped past him, reading out the charges. He laughed at first, tried to joke, tried to persuade. When that didn't work, his voice sharpened. He demanded they leave. "Threatened to call the chief," threatened lawsuits, threatened everything except the truth. My parents rushed into the hallway, both shouting, both frantic. My mother grabbed one officer by the arm, screaming that this was harassment. My father insisted they were ruining their careers by touching his son. They kept repeating the same sentence over and over. Daniel would never do something like this. Then Halloran pressed play. Lily's voice filled the house, the fear in it, the pleading, the raw human pain that no lie could drown out. My mother went silent mid-scream, her face draining of color. Then her knees buckled, and she collapsed into my father's arms. He didn't speak, not one word. Daniel's smile vanished. Something violent flickered through him, something he didn't bother to hide anymore. He lunged at me so fast the officers barely caught him. His face twisted with pure hatred, the mask shattered for good. "You should have stayed quiet," he spat as they dragged him outside. "You should have stayed out of this, Alice." The sun was rising, pale and soft, as they pushed him into the back of the patrol car. My parents stood frozen in the doorway, their perfect world collapsing in real time. And for the first time in my life, I felt steady, solid. I wasn't quiet. And for the first time, someone finally listened. The trial stretched on like a long winter slow, heavy, exhausting in ways I didn't expect. I sat through every hearing, every testimony, every moment Daniel tried to look innocent. My parents showed up at first, sitting stiffly in the front row, pretending they were victims of some terrible misunderstanding. And during those early days, they tried to point the blame anywhere but at themselves, including me. My mother said I'd always had a dramatic streak. My father claimed I'd been emotionally unstable for years. Hearing those words hurt, but they didn't sting the way they once would have. Maybe because I finally understood they weren't defending a son. They were defending a story they'd built their whole lives around. But stories can only hold so much weight, and evidence holds more. As the recordings played in court, as Lily's voice echoed across that silent room, I watched something inside my parents fracture. Their confidence slipped. Their excuses ran dry. By the end of the second week, they stopped blaming me and started distancing themselves from Daniel instead, twisting the truth into a shape they could still live with. But the truth didn't bend for them. Not this time. When investigators brought up the past disappearances, when old reports resurfaced, when timelines overlapped perfectly with Daniel's habits, everything they'd tried to bury rose back up like bones in the dirt. Eventually, they broke. They admitted knowing things they never should have hidden. They admitted covering for him. They admitted choosing silence over someone else's life. Their reputations shattered instantly. And Daniel was found guilty on multiple counts. Lily's case, the earlier girls, crimes the town could no longer pretend weren't real. People expected me to feel victorious, proud, relieved. But sitting in that courtroom, listening to the verdict, I didn't feel triumph. I felt grief. For Lily. For the girls who never came home. For myself. The child who kept trying to earn love from people who never really saw her. When I finally stepped outside the courthouse, the wind hit me softly, almost like an exhale. The air felt clearer, lighter. A poison lifted. My revenge wasn't sweet, but it was necessary. And necessary, I realized, is its own kind of justice. I moved to the coast a few months after the trial ended. Not because I wanted to start over in some dramatic way, but because I needed a place where the air didn't feel heavy with history. The town I chose was small, quiet, the kind of place where mornings smelled like salt and coffee, and no one knew my last name. I rented a little apartment above a bakery, with creaky floors and sunlight that spilled across the walls in the afternoons. It felt imperfect, but safe. And safe was something I hadn't felt in years. Therapy became part of my week, the same way brushing my teeth or making breakfast was. At first, I hated it. I didn't want to talk about the trial, or Daniel, or my parents. I didn't want to hear the word trauma ever again. But slowly, piece by piece, it started to help, not by erasing what happened, but by giving me space to breathe around it. Healing wasn't a straight line. It was more like a loop, remembering, grieving, rebuilding, then circling back to remember again. And somehow, each loop hurt a little less. I started volunteering with a missing persons group. It felt right, somehow, to take all the pain, all the fear, all the anger, and turn it into something that might help someone else. Sometimes the families would hug me, not knowing anything about what I'd lived through. Sometimes they'd just sit across from me, silent, eyes full of worry. In those moments, I thought of Lily. I thought of the quiver in her breath, and I promised myself I would carry her story with respect, not revenge, but healing had its shadows too. Some nights I still woke up thinking I heard Lily's voice. Other nights I felt Daniel standing in the doorway the way he had in that motel, even though he was locked away miles from me. My therapist told me that memories don't disappear. They quiet down. And she was right. Because now, when those shadows come, I know how to shut the door. My parents never called, never wrote, never tried to explain. Their silence used to sting, but now it feels like closure, the final gift they ever gave me. It confirmed what I had finally accepted. I didn't lose a family. I escaped one. I'm building a life now, not from fear or expectation, but from strength I didn't know I had. Some days are softer than others, but none of them are ruled by him anymore. And for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid. Sometimes justice isn't about winning. It's about finally choosing yourself over the people who taught you to stay silent.